Welcome to Story Medicine. I'm Joe Summerfield. For over 20 years, I've been working to better understand and support people in navigating this human experience, and I've come to believe that stories are encoded with the collective wisdom of all who have come before us, that they bring us into connection with the collective unconscious and contain treasure waiting to be decoded. This podcast explores traditional tales through that lens. Each episode offers a story told in full, an exploration of the medicine it may be offering, and 3 practices to help you to integrate that medicine. Today's story comes from the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, the great national epic of Persia, composed by the poet Ferdowsi around the year 1000 CE. The Shahnameh is one of the longest poems ever written by a single author, 50,000 couplets, covering the full sweep of Persian kings and heroes from the mythic creation of the world to the Arab conquest of the 7th century. It stands alongside Homer's epics and Dante's Divine Comedy as one of the foundational literary works of human civilization, and it has been read and recited and loved continuously for 1,000 years. Ferdowsi worked on it for over 30 years, drawing on oral traditions and earlier chronicles to preserve what he understood as the irreplaceable heart of Persian culture. Within it is the story of Zal and Rudaba. This is a love story with many layers for us to explore. Let's begin. Part 1. The Story. There was once a great warrior called Sam, whose name was spoken with honor throughout the Persian lands. He ruled in Sistan in the south, and for many years he had been the strong arm of the Persian king, fierce in battle, generous in peace, a man who held his world together with both sword and wisdom. But Sam carried one sorrow that none of his victories could touch. He had no heir. He had prayed for a son. He had waited. And then, at last, the birth came. The women of the household looked at the infant and fell silent. He was strong, he was healthy, his face was remarkable, bright and as clear as a new day. But his hair, from the very crown of his small head, was as white as snow, the hair of a man who had lived 100 years. The nurses kept the secret for as long as they could. They were afraid of Sam's wrath, afraid of what he would make of this. And for days they tended to the child and said nothing, until they could no longer hide it. When Sam finally saw his son, he was crushed. In the world he inhabited, shaped by the Zoroastrian understanding of order and its opposite, a child born like this could mean only one thing. It was the mark of Ahriman, the dark spirit, an omen of curse and disorder that had been carried into the bloodline. Though Sam loved his child, that love was not enough to see past this. So Sam ordered the infant to be carried away, north to the great Alborz Mountains, the range that runs along Persia's north edge, and left there on an exposed slope beneath the open sky. High above, in the peaks of Alborz, there lived the Simurgh. Her nature was composite, part great raptor, like a phoenix, part dog, her face sometimes said to carry human wisdom. Her feathers were the colour of copper in the light. She was vast, vast enough to darken the sky wherever she flew, or to carry an elephant in her claws. And she was ancient beyond reckoning. She was said to have witnessed the destruction and renewal of the world 3 times over. She roosted at the summit of the tree of life itself, the great tree at the centre of the world, in whose branches were held the seeds of every plant that had ever grown or would ever grow. And when the Simurgh took flight and the tree shook, those seeds scattered across the earth. She watched the world long enough to understand it in ways that no human lifetime could compass. On this particular day, she was returning to her nest high on the mountain to feed her young, and in the pass below she heard something, a cry. She circled lower, and there on the bare rock, wind-swept and burning under the mountain sun, was an infant left alone. She gathered him in her great wings and carried him up to her nest. She called him Zal, the aged one, the white-haired one, and she raised him as her own. Years passed. Zal grew up in the nest of the Simurgh, high above the world and its categories. He grew strong in the way that things grow strong outside of walls, shaped by the wind and the wild and the particular wisdom of a creature who had seen everything. He learned to see from height, to hold complexity without needing to resolve it, to be comfortable in the place between the human world and whatever lies beyond it. And so he grew into a young man of remarkable power. He was content in his way. The nest was the only home that he had ever known. The Simurgh was the only mother he had ever known. But there came a day, as there always will, when Zal stood at the edge of the nest. Looking down at the distant lowlands, he felt something pulling him. Something like readiness, the sense that it was time for whatever would come next. Far to the south, in Sistan, Sam had been haunted by a dream. He saw his sun, grown now, shining from a mountain peak as if the sun had settled there. Each time he would wake with the full weight of what he had done, and with the certainty that he had been wrong. So he made the journey north himself with his retinue to the Alborz. When the Simurgh saw Sam's party approaching below, she knew what it meant. The hour had come. She turned to Zal and told him. Even though the idea of leaving tore at him, the nest had been home, and she had been everything. He did understand. Before they said goodbye, the Simurgh drew 3 feathers from her own wing. They glowed copper-bright in the mountain light. "Burn one," she told him. "If you are ever in need of me, I will come." And then, bearing the weight of her grief, she let him go. Father and son met on the slope. Sam embraced Zal with the remorse of a man who had spent years suffering the consequences of his decision. Zal, who had been raised by a creature who had never abandoned anything in her long life, found it in himself to receive his father without bitterness. Zal returned to the kingdom beside his father, and in time took on responsibilities, travelling the Persian lands. And one season he came to Kabul. Kabul was ruled by Mehrab, a man of intelligence and just governance, whose authority extended across a wide territory and who paid his tribute faithfully to the Persian crown. He was also a man carrying a particular inheritance. He was a descendant of Zahak, the great tyrant of a former age. The lineage made him, in Persian eyes, permanently suspect. However honourably he lived, his blood was his blood. When Mehrab came to meet Zal, he praised what he saw. And at some point, through the talk that passes between households, through descriptions carried by those who travel between courts, Zal heard about Mehrab's daughter. Her name was Rudaba. They said that she stood as tall as a cypress tree, that her hair was black and reached to her ankles, that she was, from head to foot, a paradise, ornament, learning, and beauty. But Rudaba had also heard about Zal, the white-haired prince raised on a mountain by a mythical bird, strange by his own people's measure and formed outside of any category that the world offered men. She sent 5 of her trusted women to find him, to speak with him, to carry words between them. And one night, Zal came to the walls of her palace. Rudaba was on the roof, with the full moon behind her. She let down her hair from the high parapet, that extraordinary length of it like a rope of dark silk reaching to the ground. Zal kissed her hair and refused to climb it. "I could never cause you harm," he told her. So instead, he threw his own lariat up to the battlements and climbed that instead. They talked through the night, 2 people shaped by difference, recognizing something in each other that neither had found in the world below. and when the darkness began to lift, they pledged themselves to each other. Neither of them was ignorant of what stood between them: Zal's strangeness, Rudaba's lineage. Both of them marked, both of them reaching across a boundary that the world had declared uncrossable. Zal returned to his camp and consulted his advisors, and they were wary. He wrote to Sam in full honesty, setting out everything: who Rudaba was, whose daughter, what he wanted and why. Sam's court was dismayed. The Mubeds, the Zoroastrian priests and wise counselors who held advisory authority at the Persian court, counseled against it. Mehrab was of Zahak's line. The Persian king Manucher would never sanction this. Sam, caught between his son and his obligations, referred the question to astrologers. The astrologers read the stars for 3 days and 3 nights and returned with a prophecy. The child born of this union would be the greatest champion that Persia had ever known, a defender of the realm, the likes of whom had never existed and would never exist again. So Sam set out for Manucher's court to make the case, bringing the prophecy, bringing the account of Zal's achievements. Zal himself appeared before the king, answered his wisest men's riddles, and proved himself in tournament. Meanwhile, in Kabul, Rudaba's mother, Simurgh, had learned of the liaison. She was not a woman who stood still in crisis. When Mehrab learned what had happened, his first impulse was severity. Rudaba had put the entire kingdom at risk. He reached for punishment, and it was Simurgh who held him back. She saw something that he didn't yet see. She travelled to Sam's camp herself, carrying gifts from Mehrab's treasury: gold, horses, jewels, the full weight of the kingdom's offering. She was so full of worry that it showed on her face like bruises on her skin, but she went anyway. She came before Sam and made her case with courage and intelligence, and Sam received her with every honour. He was moved. Together, Sam's advocacy, Simurgh's journey, the prophecy of the astrologers, and Zal's own proof of himself before the king, they turned the tide. Manucher gave his blessing. The wedding was celebrated with great jubilation in Kabul, and not long afterwards, Rudaba was expecting her first child. As the months passed, it became clear that something extraordinary was happening. The child growing within her was unlike any that the midwives had attended, too large, too powerful, and too much for the ordinary process of birth. Rudaba grew weaker as the pregnancy developed. As her time came, the labour was agonizing and nothing moved. The midwives did everything they knew, and it was not enough. Zal watched his wife fade toward death and understood he had reached the limit of human knowledge. He went to the fire. He took one of the feathers that the Simurgh had given him on the mountain, and he burned it. And the Simurgh came. She told him what must be done, a way of bringing the child into the world that no one in that time had attempted. A precise cut following her exact instruction. Zal followed every word. Rudaba survived, and the child who came into the world that night, born of the white-haired and the stigmatized, of the mountain raised and the demon descended, delivered not by the midwives of the court, but by the wisdom of the ancient bird, was Rostam. And Rostam would become the greatest hero that the Shahnameh would ever name. The champion of Persia, the defender of the realm, the one that the kingdom had most needed and least expected. And so it was. What the court had feared became, in the end, what saved it. Part 2. The Medicine. Let's explore what medicine this story may be offering us. Before we start, if you know someone who might appreciate this story's medicine right now, please share this episode with them. And if you're enjoying the podcast and would like to help others find it too, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. Thank you. Zal is born carrying a sign that his father cannot interpret: white hair. In the Zoroastrian world that Ferdowsi inhabited, physical defects or abnormalities were understood as potential signs of Ahrimanic intrusion into creation. Ahriman is the personification of evil and destruction, and the opposition of Ahura Mazda, the supreme creator and embodiment of truth. Sam looked at his son's white hair and interpreted the child of Ahriman. That was how he made sense of what appeared to him to fall outside of the natural order and his expectations. We know that Sam longed for a child, and he is, by every other measure, honourable, though he's not evil. But the framework that he'd inherited left no room for this child. I think this speaks to what happens when something that we experience exceeds the framework that we've been given to understand it. Because of the absolute necessity of our frameworks of understanding, our first reflex is not to change the framework, it's to remove that which doesn't fit. We do this all the time, usually unknowingly, with the parts of ourselves or the people in our lives that exceed our inherited categories. The thing that doesn't fit the story that we've taken to understand about how things are gets pushed to the edge, gets interpreted as wrong or dangerous. Essentially, the framework protects itself by removing what challenges it. To recognize and to engage on this level has the potential for transformative impact. And essentially, this is the journey that Sam finds himself on throughout the course of this story. And we also find out from the story that the edge is exactly where Zal must go to be formed. There was no place for him within the court. He had to leave. And in leaving, he arrived somewhere more suitable, somewhere outside of the order of the court, in the nest of a magical creature who had seen 3 destructions of the world, who sat in the tree of life, and who scattered the seeds of all possible futures wherever she moved. She was, in this sense, the keeper of unlived potential, of everything that had not yet become. So, of course, it was her that must receive Zal. What the Simurgh offers Zal beyond shelter and nourishment is the opportunity to become, outside of the frameworks that couldn't hold him. The exile turned out to be essential for his cultivation. It feels like there's an important message here for us, about how we understand the shadow and the parts of ourselves that we have pushed away. The medicine isn't simply that the exiled parts cultivate themselves, because what festers in the dark, what is pushed away in shame and never tended to, will continue to play out in our experience and deepen over time. So what the story seems to be illustrating instead is the potential that those exiled parts have if they can be met appropriately. Zal doesn't remain on the rock, swept by the wind and burning in the sun. The Simurgh is what makes Zal's exile generative rather than destructive. She receives him. She names him. She sees in him not a curse, but a particular potential. And she tends to and nurtures what was cast out. She allows the white-haired one to remain outside of the existing order. And then she lets him go. And then he integrates back into an order that his presence changes. This seems to me to be a clear map for shadow work and integration. For us, it might look like asking, what feeling, aspect, or behavior in me has been pushed to the edge? Can I name it? Can I see its potential? Can I allow it to be held by something larger than my existing interpretive frameworks and tend to it? And then, can I let my old frameworks adapt to its presence and let it go? And then, after cultivation and integration, the love story can begin. Both Zal and Rudaba had been stigmatized. He was banished due to his hair, and her lineage from Zahak marks her family as permanently suspect. The sins of the ancestor had become a permanent contamination of her bloodline. Her father Mehrab is a just ruler, and Rudaba is, as Ferdowsi describes her, all beauty and learning and ornament, and also possessed of courage and intelligence. But neither of them can wash off what their blood is said to carry. Rudaba hears about Zal and sends her women to arrange the meeting. There is a quality here, an intuitive knowing of what something is before the evidence is fully assembled, and the willingness on the basis of that to reach across a boundary that has been declared uncrossable. The two finally come to meet at the wall, and Rudaba lets her hair down for Zal to ascend. This is reminiscent of the familiar story of Rapunzel, so as a point of interest I'd like to explore that a little further. The written tale of Zal and Rudaba predates Rapunzel by around 800 years, and the oral tradition possibly by at least another 1,000. So this tale is much older, but further than that, there are important differences. In Rapunzel, the prince implores Rapunzel to let down her hair so that he can ascend. It has a romantic but impulsive or frenzied quality to it. Whereas in this story, Zal honors her hair with a kiss and then refuses it, choosing to climb a rope instead. In choosing not to use her striking gift as a tool for his ascent, he demonstrates a kind of chivalry and reverence, rather than urgency or entitlement. He considers her and what's right, rather than simply acting on desire. This may be reflective of Zoroastrianism, where conscious ethical choice is central. She has initiated connection with him, and he forges his own path to her. To me, this gives their union a grounded and powerful quality. There must be medicine here for us about honor and reciprocation in love. Zal admires and honors what's in front of him without immediately making it useful for himself. Rather than taking from her, he is reciprocating and he is meeting her. This is part of what the Simurgh's formation has produced in the masculine. Distinct from the conquest that the warrior court might have taught, Zal demonstrates the capacity for genuine encounter. And then begins the negotiations. Again, the existing order is challenged by the new frontiers that these two are charting. There are letters, astrologers, consultation with the Zoroastrian priests, Sindukt's journey, and Zal's appearance before the king. Again, this is the process of integration. Whether and how Zal and Rudaba's love can be brought into relationship with the wider world it exists within. The consulting of astrologers is, from within the Persian tradition, an act of seeking counsel from those trained to read patterns larger than individual desire. The Mubeds, or the Zoroastrian priests, held advisory authority. To bring a major decision before them was an act of humility. The acknowledgement that what we want and what is right are questions that sometimes require a wider lens or deeper wisdom than the two people directly involved can provide. What emerges from these consultations is surprising. The prophecy doesn't only permit the marriage, it goes further to reveal why the union matters beyond the satisfaction of the two people themselves. The love that looked like disorder, like contamination, like the breaking of appropriate boundaries, turns out to be an origin point essential to the kingdom. What medicine does this hold for us? That union is not only about the impulse or satisfaction of the two individuals involved. Firstly, that it must be witnessed and held by other sources of wisdom. Perhaps our faith practices, our spiritual leaders, our families, and our communities. And secondly, perhaps there's an important teaching here for a culture that overemphasizes love's meaning entirely in the private experience of the individuals within the couple. We can see in the unfolding of this interpretation of love that it can easily lead to disappointment, disillusionment, and dissolution. What we see in these writings is the generative quality of union. Union as a creative container. as a new entity that has a purpose of its own. The Shahnameh is illustrating that the conjunction of two particular people, shaped in particular ways, has significance beyond their own individual gratification. This story has a coherent feminine thread running through it. The Simurgh, Rudaba, Sindakht. These are three different expressions of feminine archetypes, operating at three different registers, but recognizable as kin to each other. The Simurgh operates at the mythic register. She is ancient, composite, and vast. She sits in the tree of potential and scatters seeds of possibility when she moves. She receives and recognizes what was discarded. She tends to him, and then she lets him go when the time comes. Yet she remains available, across years, across distance, for the moment when her knowledge or wisdom is required. She is a maternal feminine in this story. The story gives Zal two mothers, one present at birth but unnamed and absent beyond that, and one ancient and permanent. The formative mother, whose influence runs all the way to the birth of the next generation, is the bird. Rudaba, the maiden who would become mother, operates at the personal register. She sees Zal before she has met him, and she moves towards what she sees. She initiates, she risks, she co-creates, and she is the one through whom the impossible birth must pass. She is creative, vulnerable, and courageous. And Sindakht operates at the relational and political register. She is the first to learn of the love. Her wisdom holds Mehrab back from reacting severely. She has seen something that nobody else can see, and she travels alone to Sam's camp to make the case that nobody else will make. Despite being so full of anxiety that it showed on her face like bruises, she goes anyway. She acts with intelligence under pressure, and she advocates boldly for her beliefs. And she navigates between the private and the public, between what she knows and what she can demonstrate. In some Persian traditions, the name Sindakht is interpreted as daughter of the Simurgh. And the connection is clear. The woman who most clearly sees the possibility of what is forming and acts to protect it carries in her name a trace of the great bird who saw it first. These three figures share a lineage and a quality of perception. The ability to recognize potential before it has justified itself by outcome. Intuition. The Simurgh sees a world-shaping possibility in a crying infant on a mountainside. Rudaba sees somebody worth crossing boundaries for, and Sindakht sees what this union stands to create. This quality of perception, of seeing what is becoming before it has become, is feminine medicine that this story seems to be offering very clearly. For us, where can we find access to this quality in our own lives? In a world built around reductive materialist philosophies, in a time where we are saturated by information and governed by efficiency, where might we find this feminine power, within ourselves or around us? How can we attune to the Simurgh's quality, the ability to receive what the existing order has discarded, to tend to it, to recognize its potential before it has demonstrated anything? And then the birth. Rostam can't be born through existing channels. He's too large and too powerful. Again, this is a recognition that what is coming is outside of the capacity of ordinary frameworks. So Zal burns the feather. What was required was knowledge that exists beyond what the ordinary world has accumulated. The knowledge held by one who has seen three destructions of the world and who sits in the tree of all potential. The medicine for us here is in the symbolism of this feather. The feather is what we carry from the formative places at the edge of ordinary life. The teachers, the traditions, the rituals, the practices, the stories, the connection, that give us something that contemporary information cannot. And that feather is there for all of us, to be called on in any moment that we feel beyond what we know. If only we knew how accompanied and how supported we truly are. I truly believe that we all carry these feathers. So Zal burns the feathers and the Simurgh comes. This demonstrates the continuation of the relationship that once Zal came of age was never severed, but instead was held in potential, waiting for the moment when they were needed. Rostam is born, and he is the convergence point. Born of two parents in some way stigmatized. Delivered in the court by wisdom that only existed outside of it. He carries within him the Simurgh's lineage through his father, and Zahak's lineage through his mother. The unity of these energies brought inside the order, and he becomes the one who defends the world. This goes far beyond the simple message that outcasts can succeed. It's saying that the medicine that existing order needs will be found outside of what it already holds. For us, this is an invitation to look with the Simurgh's quality of perception. It isn't that everything outside of existing order is good, or that there is something wrong with existing order. It is important, but it is equally important to be receptive to that which lies outside of it, because that is the realm of possibility. So the medicine is that the quality of perception and reception matters. That what we do with what we cannot hold determines whether the exile becomes wound or formation. And that there are moments when we have exhausted everything that we know, when the ordinary channels cannot deliver what is trying to come through, when we need to burn the feather. Part 3. Integration Practices. The medicine for us doesn't come from understanding these patterns intellectually. In order for insight to create change in our lives, we need to invite it into our body and into our lived experience. Here are 3 practices to help you to integrate this story's medicine. First practice: meeting what was cast out. This practice follows the shape of Zal's exile from the Simurgh's perspective. Think of something in yourself that has been pushed aside. A feeling, a quality, a behavior, an aspect of who you are that doesn't fit the story that you've been told about how things should be. Something that has come to be interpreted as wrong or bad or inconvenient. Something that your world has no category for. Now ask, what has been receiving it there? Has it been held in shame and isolation, left on the rock, burning in the sun? Or has it been met with the Simurgh's quality, something that can look at it without the inherited verdict, to see what's actually there, to name it, and to tend to it? Take 20 minutes this week with a journal. Name the exiled thing as clearly as you can, then write about what it is, where it comes from, and what it might actually contain. Not what your framework says it means, but what the Simurgh might see. What potential, what quality, what might it become if it were to be received rather than rejected? You can do this with any number of different parts that may be exiled, or you can extend this same quality of perception outward, toward a person in your life or something in your community that has been dismissed or pushed to the margin. What might you see there if you looked with the Simurgh's eyes? Second practice: naming your feathers. When Zal reached the limit of everything human knowledge could offer, he burned the feather. And the Simurgh came. She was always there, held in potential, waiting to be called on. We all carry feathers, the traditions, practices, teachers, or stories that gave us something outside of the ordinary. The periods of our lives spent at the edge, the difficult passages, the unexpected places, the relationships that opened something in us that hadn't been there before, or that never fully closed. These are the sources that exist beyond what contemporary information can provide, and they are available to us if only we know that we're carrying them. Take some time this week to identify yours. Who or what formed you outside of the walls? What do you carry from those places that you don't always remember is there, that you can call on when you need? Write a list, however long it needs to be. You can even start a new notebook and add one per page. And then ask, is there something in your life right now that is beyond what you know how to handle alone? A decision, a relationship, a transition, a moment where ordinary channels feel insufficient. If so, what feather could you burn? What source of wisdom, guidance, or counsel exists beyond your own reasoning that you can bring this before? A spiritual practice, a trusted elder, a tradition, a community. Something that can see from further away than you currently can. The Simurgh is always in the tree, and the feathers are always there to be burnt. Third practice, the journey back up the mountain. Sam's dream came back to him night after night, his sun shining from a mountain peak, and each time he woke with the certainty that he had been wrong. Eventually he made the journey. This practice is about the frameworks that we've inherited, the beliefs, the stories, the values that we carry, perhaps formed by our own previous experience, or perhaps passed down through family, through culture, through religion, through education or profession, and what they have caused us to expel. Take a piece of paper and identify one inherited framework. It might be a belief about what success looks like or what's possible in your life, what kind of a person is trustworthy, what counts as valuable, what emotions are acceptable, or what kind of life is worth living. And then ask, what has this framework of understanding caused me to push away? A person, a part of myself, a way of living or being, something that didn't fit into your categories and was therefore interpreted as wrong or dangerous or simply not an option for you. Write down what that framework told you about the expelled thing. And then write separately what you actually know about it now, not through the framework's lens, but through your own direct experience. Are they the same? Or has something been lost in the expulsion that deserves a second look? You don't have to dismantle the framework. Sam didn't abandon his kingdom when he climbed back up the mountain. He simply made the journey back toward what had been cast out, and found that what he had interpreted as a curse had become, in his absence, something that the world needed. What might be waiting for you up the mountain? Ferdowsi spent 30 years creating the Shahnameh because he knew what he was preserving. And 1,000 years later, it still holds. The wisdom in these old stories waits patiently. I hope that this one's medicine found you where you need it. Thank you for listening to Story Medicine. I am Joe Summerfield. Until next time.